Hi guys, let's start the year by looking at some things in the book of Acts, chapter 17. Here, Paul starts off in Thessalonica. If you look at this little map, that's right up here on the Aegean Peninsula. This would have been during Paul's second missionary journey. And a hostile Jewish audience drives him out of Thessalonica. He goes a little bit south and west towards Berea. That is right here on the map. That same hostile audience that didn't like him at Thessalonica showed up and drove him out of Berea as well. And if you look at verse 15, it says, those who conducted Paul brought him as far as Athens. And after receiving a command for Silas and Timothy to come to him as soon as possible, they departed. So Paul sails from Berea down the peninsula, and now he's here at Athens, which you may have heard of, the ancient and modern capital of Greece, a very busy city with a lot of trade, a lot of religion, and a lot of dialogue. And look at what it says about Paul's activity in Athens. Now, while Paul was waiting for them at Athens, his spirit was provoked within him as he saw that the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the devout persons, and in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be there. Some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers also conversed with him, and some said, "What does this babbler wish to say?" Others said, "He seems to be a preacher of foreign divinities," because he was preaching Jesus and the resurrection. And they took him and brought him to the Areopagus, saying, "May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting, for you bring some strange things to our ears. We wish to know, therefore, what these things mean." Now all the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there would spend their time in nothing except telling or hearing something new. Now, this first semester of Word in the World, a lot of what we're going to be doing is looking at other world religions, other world views, and I would encourage you to think of them as stories. People are living in a story. Maybe they see themselves as the main character of their story. Their story has a background, a setting. Their story has a problem. It has a resolution. It has a future. Is that future? And they all lived happily ever after. And the story that you are living in, right? Maybe you're a Christian. It's the Christian story, and we tell important parts of that story during the church calendar every year, like Christmas and Easter and other parts of the story. But your neighbor might be living in a radically different story from their own perspective. Maybe it's a different religion. Maybe it's not religious at all in their own mind. Maybe it's just a different philosophy. Maybe their story is just very personal, their own personal goals and how that fits into their family and their hopes for the future. But you can think of these religions we're going to study as stories. And what we're going to find out is when Paul is speaking to different groups in Athens, whether it's Jews there or Epicureans there or Stoics there, he knows a little bit about these stories that they believe in. And that knowledge he has of their stories that they believe in allows him to tell what he believes, and I believe, is the story about Jesus. So look at what Paul begins to say here, starting in verse 22. So Paul, standing in the midst of Areopagus, said, "Men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious. For as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription, To the unknown God. What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you." So he sees, hey, you guys are so religious. You've covered all your bases with your idols and your altars. Just in case you missed a God who deserves your devotion and worship, you've got an altar here to the unknown God. Well, Paul's a Christian. He believes he knows who the God is. And he uses this opportunity of an altar to an unknown God to tell you, you know what? There is a God you don't know about. The real one. Let me tell you all about him. Verse 24. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth. We know in the Christian story who that man is. It's Adam. Having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place, that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. Yet, God is actually not far from each one of us. For, quote, "In him we live and move and have our being." As even some of your own poets have said, for we are indeed his, God's offspring. Paul knows their poets, and he quotes their poets in order to make his point about the Christian story, the true story that he's revealing to them. Being then God's offspring, God's children, we ought not to think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image, formed by the art and imagination of man. The times of ignorance God overlooked, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent, because he has fixed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed. And of this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead. Right? That day on which God will judge the world in righteousness is the last day. We don't know the day or hour, but it's coming. And the man whom God has appointed to judge the world in righteousness is Jesus Christ. And the proof that Paul offers here that Jesus Christ is the one is that that man rose from the dead. Just as Jesus said he would be handed over to the authorities and killed, lifted up on a cross, and rise on the third day, that happened. And Paul says that is the proof that that is God's man, God's son, the one who will judge the world in righteousness on the last day. Now, when they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked, but others said, "We will hear you again about this." So Paul went out from their midst, but some men joined him and believed, among whom also were Dionysius the Areopagite, and a woman named Damaris, and others with them. So you have a story that you believe in about the world, about yourself, about your family, about life, about God, about reality. Other people have a story too, and it may not match yours. What we're doing first semester of this senior theology class is studying these different stories. Stories like Buddhism or Hinduism or Islam or Judaism or Christianity. And we see that these stories have some commonalities, but much more are the contrasts. And it's a good thing to know a little bit about the story that your neighbor believes in. So we'll spend this first part of the year learning about these other stories. We see Paul taking advantage of his knowledge of other people's stories in order to tell the true story. Notice that in that first paragraph I read, it said he was conversing with Epicurean and Stoic philosophers. Now, maybe you've never heard of Epicurus and what he taught, or the Stoics and what they taught. Well, let me tell you something. They both taught that the future is set and fixed. Whatever is going to happen is going to happen, and you can do nothing to alter it. In our day, that might be called fatalism or determinism, depending on who's presenting that worldview of a fixed future. So Paul knows that they believe in a fixed future. Epicureans had one attitude towards it. Well, if the future is fixed, then I can do nothing to alter it. Well, then just eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. They had a sort of pleasure-seeking, some people call this a hedonistic outlook on life. If life is going to throw things at you and you have no control over it, you might as well enjoy it. And that was their attitude. That was the story they told themselves and lived in. The Stoics had a different attitude towards a fixed future. They said if life is going to throw whatever it's going to throw at you and you can do nothing to alter it, the best thing you can do is be a man. It's like a river is coming at you. You're going to plant your feet firmly in that river, stand your ground, and not be moved by it, right? So you're going to be mature, adult-like, in the way that you handle a future that you can't control. Well, Paul tells them at the end of his sermon about Christ that there is at least something fixed. You were right about something. God has fixed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed. And of this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead. So he tells his audience that believes in a different story than he does, well, you were right about one thing. At least this is fixed about the future. Jesus is coming back. He will judge the world in righteousness. And this gives him an opportunity to give the gospel about Jesus. Your future can be changed by Jesus for the better. So think of your life as a story. Think other people might be living in a different story than you are. And as we study different world religions and philosophies and views this first semester, we'll do a little bit of compare and contrast analysis to those stories and the Christian story, which we read in the Bible. God bless you guys. You'll see your first week tasks posted in the top module on Canvas.